By the middle of summer 1915, the Turkish command on the Gallipoli Peninsula had a problem they couldn't solve with artillery, with reinforcements, or with frontal assault. Somewhere in the Anzac lines, in a loophole barely 30 centimeters wide, cut into a wall of sandbags on a position called Chattam's Post, a single rifleman was killing their soldiers at a rate that was altering the arithmetic of the entire sector. The Turks couldn't move in daylight. They couldn't man forward trenches without losing men they couldn't replace. They couldn't rotate units through communication trenches without someone going down before he'd covered 10 meters. The shooter was using a standard short magazine Lee-Enfield, the same .303 rifle every Australian on the peninsula carried. And by the time the Ottoman officers worked out that their losses weren't random, that one man was responsible for dozens of confirmed kills in a matter of weeks. The body count was already past 50 and climbing. His name was William Edward Singh. The Australians called him Billy. His fellow snipers and the officers who logged his kills called him the murderer. The Turks, who couldn't see him and couldn't find his position, had a different name for the gap in the sandbags where his rifle barrel appeared and disappeared in the space of a heartbeat. They called it the Spot of Death. Singh was 29 years old, a trooper in the 5th Light Horse Regiment, Australian Imperial Force, serving dismounted because the horses had been left behind in Egypt. He was 5'6", quiet, and half Chinese in an army that officially barred non-Europeans from enlisting. The recruiting office should have turned him away. It didn't, and within 8 months, he'd become the most prolific killer on the peninsula. His father, John Singh, had emigrated from Shanghai to the Queensland goldfields in the 1860s, part of the wave of Chinese laborers who came to Australia chasing gold and stayed to build lives in country towns that didn't always want them. John settled near Claremont, a small cattle and mining town in central Queensland, roughly 300 kilometers inland from the coast. He married Mary Ann Pugh, an Anglo-Australian woman from the district, and Billy was born on the 2nd of March, 1886. The boy grew up on a property where shooting was a daily skill: kangaroos, rabbits, anything that moved on the land, and by his teens, he was entering marksmanship competitions across Queensland. He won consistently. The rifle clubs in central Queensland knew his name before the army did. He could shoot at distances that other competitors found unreliable, and he could do it with a calm that unnerved the men standing next to him on the firing line. When war broke out in 1914 and Australia began raising the Australian Imperial Force for service overseas, Singh walked into the recruiting office in Proserpine. The enlistment regulations under the Defence Act explicitly restricted service to men who were substantially of European origin or descent. Singh was half Chinese. His face made that obvious. The recruiting officer looked at him, looked at the form, and wrote British subject in the space where racial background was required. Whether that was a deliberate decision based on Singh's reputation as a shooter, and the evidence suggests it was, because word of his competition record had spread through the district, or simply a bureaucratic shortcut by a man who needed bodies, the result was the same. The Army got a rifleman whose skill with a .303 would prove more valuable than any regulation it had written. Singh was assigned to the 5th Light Horse Regiment and shipped to Egypt for training. The Light Horse were mounted infantry, men who rode to the fight and then dismounted to engage on foot. But when the Gallipoli landings were planned for April 1915, the horses stayed behind. There was no room for them on the beaches, no terrain to ride on, and no tactical role for cavalry on a peninsula where the front lines were measured in meters. The Light Horse went ashore as foot soldiers. Singh landed at Gallipoli on the 25th of April 1915, the first day of the campaign, and within weeks had found his role. The geography of the Anzac sector at Gallipoli created conditions that were unique in the First World War. The Australians and New Zealanders held a narrow beachhead on the western shore of the peninsula, clinging to a strip of broken ridgeline that rose steeply from the water. The Turkish positions overlooked them from higher ground on almost every side. The trenches were dug into rocky soil and shale, connected by shallow communication trenches that offered limited cover from observation above. At some points, the distance between the Australian and Turkish frontline trenches was less than 30 meters, close enough to hear conversations, close enough to throw a grenade by hand. In these conditions, conventional infantry tactics were almost useless. Frontal assaults produced mass casualties for negligible gains. Artillery was limited by the terrain and the proximity of friendly and enemy positions. The war on this section of front had stalled into a siege, and the weapon that mattered most in a siege was the rifle in the hands of a man who could use it. Singh established his firing position at Chattam's post, overlooking a stretch of Turkish trench and communication line on Bolton's Ridge. His spotter, Trooper Tom Sheehan, sat beside him with a periscope, calling targets and confirming hits. The two of them worked a daily routine that was methodical, patient, and lethally efficient. Sheehan would scan the Turkish lines for movement, a head above a parapet, a soldier crossing a gap between traverses, a supply carrier running bent double along a trench that wasn't deep enough. He'd call the range and the position. Singh would fire once, one round, one target. Then both men would pull back from the loophole before the Turks could triangulate the shot. The entire engagement, from target identification to withdrawal, lasted seconds, and then they'd wait for the next one. The engagement distances on Gallipoli were unlike any other theater of the First World War. At Chattam's post, Singh was working at ranges between 30 and 300 meters, distances where a man with a competition-grade eye and a steady hand didn't need a telescopic sight. Singh didn't have one, at least not in the early months. He was shooting with open iron sights on a standard-issue SMLE, hitting targets that appeared for 2 or 3 seconds and then vanished. A telescopic sight was fitted to his rifle later in the campaign, but the early kills, the ones that built his reputation and drew Turkish attention, were made with the same equipment every private soldier on the peninsula carried. The difference was the man behind it. His spotter logged every confirmed kill. By mid-June, the count had passed 50. By August, it was over 100. The numbers were verified by Sheehan's observations and cross-checked against casualty reports from the Turkish lines that filtered back through intelligence channels. The scale of what one man was doing to an entire sector of the Turkish line took time to register at the Ottoman command level. The Turks knew they were losing men to sniper fire. Every army on Gallipoli was, but the concentration of casualties in a single area, the consistency, the fact that soldiers were being hit in locations that had previously been safe, pointed to something beyond routine harassing fire. Turkish officers began to notice patterns. Units posted opposite Chattam's post took disproportionate losses compared to adjacent sectors. Replacements sent to that section of the line lasted days, sometimes hours, before someone else went down. Supply runs that had been manageable became lethal, and the fire was coming from the same direction every time, a tiny loophole in a wall of sandbags that couldn't be targeted by artillery because it was too small and too well concealed among dozens of identical positions along the Anzac parapet. The Ottoman command identified the problem and decided to solve it the only way that made tactical sense. They sent their best sniper to kill the Australian. The man the Australians came to know as Abdul the Terrible arrived on the Turkish line sometime in the middle of 1915, tasked with a single objective: find the shooter at Chattam's post and eliminate him. Abdul, his real name was never confirmed in Australian records, and the nickname was given by the Anzac troops, who learned of his reputation through captured prisoners and intercepted communications, was by all accounts an expert marksman, possibly trained in the Ottoman military's specialist sniper program. He'd been pulled from another section of the peninsula and sent to the sector opposite Singh's position specifically because the Turkish command had identified one rifle as the source of their casualties. The Ottoman generals understood what Singh's spotter and commanding officer already knew. This wasn't a firefight between armies. This was one man reshaping the tactical balance of a section of front, and the only counter was another man with equivalent skill. Abdul went to work immediately, and the results were fast. He began picking off Australian soldiers in positions that had been safe from Turkish fire for weeks. His angle was different from the standard Turkish shooting. He was firing from concealed positions that the Australians hadn't identified, using ground that their previous intelligence sweeps had marked as inactive. He was accurate enough to hit men through loopholes and observation slits, which meant he was reading the Anzac trench layout and identifying firing positions with a trained eye. Within days, the Anzac troops in the sector knew they had a problem. The word went around the trenches the way bad news always travels in a static line, fast and with the specific details stripped out, replaced by fear. There was a Turkish sniper on the ridge who didn't miss. He'd already hit several men, and the consensus among those who understood sniper warfare was that Abdul had been sent for one reason: he was hunting Billy Singh. The duel between Singh and Abdul lasted several days. Both men understood the rules. The first to reveal his position would be the one who took a bullet. Singh couldn't fire freely because Abdul was watching for his muzzle flash. Abdul couldn't scan openly because Singh's spotter was watching for his. It was a war of patience fought in centimeters, the width of a loophole, the angle of a periscope, the fraction of a second between a flash and a shot. Sheehan, Singh's spotter, was glassing the Turkish line through a periscope, trying to locate Abdul's position by the direction of his fire. The tension in the Australian trenches around Chattam's post was different from the usual anxiety of frontline duty. The men knew that their best shooter was being hunted and that the hunter was good enough to have already proven his skill against protected positions. And then Abdul found the periscope. The bullet came through the observation slit and hit Sheehan. The round passed close enough to his head to wound him. Some accounts say it struck the periscope itself, driving metal fragments into Sheehan's face, others that it grazed him directly. Either way, Sheehan went down, injured badly enough to be pulled off the line. Singh was now alone in his position, without a spotter, facing a marksman who had just proven he could put a bullet through a gap the width of a man's fist from hundreds of meters away. Abdul had drawn first blood, but he'd also done the one thing a sniper in a static duel cannot afford to do. He'd fired from a position that Singh could now narrow down by the angle of entry. Singh waited. The details of what happened next come primarily from the diary of Ion Idrias, a New Zealand-born trooper serving with the Australian Light Horse, who later became one of Australia's most widely read authors. Idrias had been working as Singh's secondary spotter and observer in the weeks before the duel, and his diary entries from Gallipoli, published after the war as the Desert Column, contain the most detailed eyewitness account of Singh's method. According to Idrias, Singh didn't rush. He knew Abdul's general area from the angle of the shot that had hit Sheehan. He scanned that section of the Turkish line, centimeter by centimeter, waiting for Abdul to fire again. The wait lasted more than a day when Abdul finally shot again at another target, exposing himself for a fraction of a second. Singh caught the muzzle flash, one shot from the Lee-Enfield. Abdul the Terrible dropped behind his parapet and didn't fire again. Idrias wrote that Singh waited, and then he got him. The elimination of Abdul removed the only serious counter-sniper threat the Turks managed to deploy against Singh during the entire Gallipoli campaign. After the duel, Singh resumed his routine at Chattam's post, and the kill count continued to climb through the summer and autumn of 1915. His commanding officer, Major Stephen Middleton, tracked the numbers through official logs and spotter confirmations. By September, the total had passed 120. By the time the Anzac forces evacuated Gallipoli in December 1915, Singh's official count stood at 150 confirmed kills. The unofficial estimates, compiled from spotter observations, fellow soldiers' accounts, and Idrias's diary, ranged between 200 and 300. The discrepancy existed because Singh often fired at targets where the hit could be observed, but the result, whether the man was killed or wounded, couldn't be confirmed from his position. Either figure made him the deadliest sniper of the entire Gallipoli campaign, on any side, Allied or Ottoman. Middleton recommended Singh for the Victoria Cross. The recommendation described him as the most dangerous sniper on the peninsula, a phrase that carried specific tactical meaning because Middleton was quantifying the operational impact of one soldier on the enemy's ability to function in an entire sector. The VC was not awarded. Singh received the Distinguished Conduct Medal instead, the second highest award available to a non-commissioned soldier. No official explanation was given for why the VC recommendation was downgraded. The DCM citation acknowledged his sustained and effective sniping, but didn't capture the scale of what he'd done, that his fire alone had forced the Turks to reroute movement across entire sections of their trench network, that he'd killed their best counter-sniper, that his presence at Chattam's post had functionally neutralized a stretch of Turkish line that thousands of soldiers and multiple artillery batteries hadn't been able to suppress. Whether his Chinese heritage played a role in the decision to deny the VC is a question the official record doesn't answer. The pattern of how the army treated him before and after the war makes the question worth asking. Gallipoli wasn't the end of Billy Singh's war. When the peninsula was evacuated and the AIF was redeployed to France in 1916, Singh went with his unit to the Western Front. The fighting there was a different war entirely, industrialized, mechanized, fought across distances and with weapons that made Gallipoli look like a skirmish by comparison. The cramped ridgelines and 30-meter no-man's lands of the peninsula were replaced by open fields swept by machine gun fire, artillery barrages that lasted days, and trench systems that stretched from the English Channel to the Swiss border. Singh fought at Pozieres in July 1916, one of the bloodiest engagements in Australian military history, where the 1st Division took 6,800 casualties in 12 days, fighting for a ruined village on a ridge above the Somme. He continued serving through the Somme campaign and into 1917 and 18, but his health was breaking down. He'd been wounded at least twice. The sustained physical strain of years of frontline service, the cold, the wet, the concussive effects of constant shelling, the mental toll of a job that required him to watch men through a rifle sight and kill them one at a time, had degraded his eyesight and his steadiness. The sniper who'd shot with iron sights at Gallipoli couldn't perform at the same level on the Western Front. He was still a soldier, still in the line, but the edge that had made him the deadliest shooter on the peninsula was gone. Singh returned to Australia in 1918. He was 32 years old, physically worn out, and carrying injuries that would affect him for the rest of his life. The country he came back to had a program for returned soldiers, the Soldier Settlement Scheme, which provided land grants to veterans so they could establish farms and rebuild their lives after the war. Thousands of returned men received blocks of land across Queensland, New South Wales, and Victoria. Singh applied. He was denied. The precise reason was never officially documented in a way that survived, but the timing and the pattern were consistent with what happened to non-white veterans across the country in the years after the war. The same racial restrictions that had almost kept him out of the army in 1914 followed him home. A man who had killed 150 enemy soldiers in defense of Australia, who had been recommended for the Victoria Cross, who had fought on 2 continents over 4 years, couldn't get a block of land from the government he'd served. He tried prospecting for gold in Queensland. That failed. He drifted into casual laboring work around Brisbane, taking whatever jobs were available: fencing, farm work, odd jobs that paid by the day. He never married. He never accumulated savings or property. The man who had been the most lethal individual weapon on the Gallipoli Peninsula lived in boarding houses and rented rooms, moving between addresses in the poorer parts of Brisbane, surviving on a war pension that barely covered rent. The competitive shooter from Claremont, who'd outshot every rifleman in Queensland before the war, was now a middle-aged laborer with deteriorating eyesight and a body that had been broken by 4 years of combat. The Distinguished Conduct Medal sat in a drawer. Nobody asked to see it. The country forgot him. That's the factual record, documented by the absence of any record at all. No journalist sought him out for an interview. No historian recorded his account of the duel with Abdul the Terrible or the 8 months at Chattam's post. No publisher offered to help him write the story that Idris had captured fragments of in the desert column. Idris himself became famous, his war diaries and subsequent books about the Australian outback, and the war made him one of the best-selling Australian authors of the 20th century, with more than 40 titles to his name. The man whose daily work Idris had documented in those diaries was living in poverty 1,500 kilometers away in Brisbane, and nobody made the connection, or if they did, nobody acted on it. Billy Singh passed away on the 19th of May, 1943, in a boarding house in Brisbane. He was 57 years old. He was alone. No family was present, no former comrades, no representatives of the army he'd served or the regiment he'd fought with. The cause was listed as heart-related illness, compounded by the accumulated effects of his war injuries. No Australian newspaper published an obituary. No military organization issued a statement. No RSL branch sent a representative to the funeral. The most prolific sniper in the history of the Gallipoli campaign, a man whose rifle had altered Turkish tactical operations across an entire sector of the peninsula, was buried in an unmarked grave at Lutwyche Cemetery in Brisbane. The headstone was blank. No name, no rank, no service number, no mention of Gallipoli or the Western Front or the 150 men he'd killed in defense of a country that couldn't find room for him when the war ended. The grave stayed unmarked for 52 years. It wasn't until 1995, 80 years after Gallipoli and 52 years after Singh's passing, that researchers identified the burial site and a proper headstone was finally placed on the grave. In 2015, on the centenary of the Gallipoli landings, the town of Claremont in Queensland, the town where Singh had grown up, where he'd learned to shoot on his father's property, where he'd won the competitions that gave him the eye and the patience that would later kill 150 men on a Turkish hillside, erected a memorial statue in his honor. The memorial came 100 years after the campaign it commemorated. What Billy Singh did at Gallipoli was a job. He sat in a hole in a sandbagged wall 30 centimeters wide, and he did the same thing every day for 8 months. He watched, he waited, and he fired one round at a time. The cumulative effect was strategic. One rifleman with a bolt-action Lee-Enfield suppressed Turkish movement across a section of front that neither artillery nor infantry assault had been able to control. The Turks sent their best man to stop him. Singh killed that man and went back to work. His official tally of 150 confirmed kills was compiled under conditions where every shot was observed and logged. The real number was almost certainly higher, because not every hit could be visually confirmed from his spotter's position. And when the war was over, the country that had needed him to kill couldn't find him a piece of land to farm. He didn't complain about it. There's no record of Singh writing letters to politicians, petitioning the repatriation department, or making public statements about his treatment. He took the work that was available, lived in the rooms he could afford, and faded out of the story that Australia told itself about its soldiers. The larrikin digger myth had room for white stockmen from the bush who cracked jokes and called officers by their first names. It didn't have room for a quiet half-Chinese shooter from Claremont who did his work in silence and then went home to nothing. The Army had been happy to overlook his ancestry when it needed a man who could shoot. The country was less generous when the shooting stopped. It took 52 years to put his name on his grave.